Okay, this is Megan reporting live from the chair. So let's start off, please, my panelists, please introduce yourselves and tell me anything you want us in our audience to know about how you are, like what your role is with workforce implementations of passkeys, and we'll start and go that way.
Start on this end. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Authenticate. My name is Michael Thelander. I'm with Axiad, and I guess in terms of our role and how we play in the FIDO Alliance and how we play in authentication, Axiad was our founders were pioneers in PIV and CAC, so that gives you a sense of like where we fit in strong authentication. About 10, 12 years ago, we looked at how do we take some of those same strong authentication methodologies and practices and start applying them to the broader enterprise. So that's kind of brought us to where we are today. We spend a lot of time trying to implement authentication workflows efficiently for our larger customers. So that's our role.
Good morning. Sorry. Good morning, Sarah Lefavrais from Thales Group. So I'm part of the marketing group inside FIDO Alliance, contributing to this group as well as the enterprise deployment group, who work on this survey that we will discuss today. So inside Thales, we are a company that is working to enable organizations to go passwordless for many years. And on the FIDO, so we have a large, I would say, expertise with companies and enterprise and workforce deploying passwordless authentication to workforce. And in FIDO, we are involved in different working groups, especially the enterprise working group, but others also on the consumer side, and security group. And globally, we are helping organizations to migrate to FIDO, implement more secure authentication methods for the different workforce and different type of users in the company.
Thank you, Sarah. And if you're just joining us, no, we are not talking about automotive use cases. Oh, there we go. Thank you. We're actually talking about workforce implementation of passkeys and trends there. And just in case you just walked in and got very confused. But thank you, Sarah. Sean, please introduce yourself.
Very good. Sean Dyon, Director of Strategic Alliances with HID. We help organizations become phishing resistant end-to-end, whether it's via software or hardware. Think of security key and or a card. I spent 18 years working directly with organizations on their identity security journeys, of course, with passwordless being one of the key pillars of that.
Thank you. And so I kind of want to level set with our panelists around what actually we're talking about in terms of passkeys when it comes to the workforce. So how many folks are familiar with the different kind of flavors of passkeys? And I assume most of you are because you're not in the Passkeys 101s. Cool. So what I want to ask is, so we have what we call synced passkeys and we have device-bound passkeys. Device-bound passkeys can be on what you would typically see as a FIDO security key, or actually could be bound to like a smartphone. And then synced passkeys are available across cloud service providers like password managers, so they're available across devices. So I just wanted to so we can clarify and level set what each of you are sort of talking about in terms of your perspectives of like what types of deployments are you working on? What are you seeing workforce and enterprises looking at in terms of the types of passkeys that they are looking at deploying and or deploying? Sarah, do you want to start with that one?
Yes. So it's really, first of all, and especially when we have large organization, it really depends on the type of users and the use case. They are looking at various ways to authenticate. Could be platform authenticators, could be sync passkeys, could be device hardware security keys, and really they adapt depending on the level assurance they want to get on the authentication methods and what fit with the user authentication journey. And it's the way we orient them in really to adapt the authentication method based on the user authentication context.
And Sean, what are you seeing?
It's actually quite interesting that where organizations are on their journey. We see a lot of organizations that are starting with device-bound as their kind of getting started point for them on their journey from start to finish. And with that central core, what they're thinking about organizationally is a few different things. How do I do a crawl, walk, run type of approach for our organization? Where do I start? And how do I get to that end state that's critical for me to get to meet my business outcomes or objectives for our organization? And so there's a couple of components that come into play to that. The first piece is thinking about in context of the access control policies that you have and the type of data that users are going to access. When you think about what that right mix or play is from a Passkey deployment process. And so where device-bound comes to play, a lot of the first adopters, early adopters, are knowledge workers, folks in technology, administrative users as well. And they kind of evolve from there over to frontline workers and others inside of the organization. And as part of that shift, we then start to open up capabilities where they can say that starting with device-bound, you can then start to leverage things such as app-based or even synced based upon the type of individual and what they have access to inside their organization.
Thank you. Michael, do you see similarly, or do you have another point of view?
I really see it very much like Sean does, and I think I would just reiterate his first point, which is it's very much a journey, and the journey for almost all of our customers did start with some sort of device-bound, some sense of like, I need to provide the same type of authentication experience on a specific device, whether it's a laptop or a kiosk, that I use using a password. So that tends to be where things start, where you get the greatest footprint, where you start developing traction within the organization, start building some positive metrics to put on those business cases. But very soon you start getting into different use cases. You get away from just device bound.
Yep.
So it's sort of, just to clarify, there is not a requirement to do one or the other in an organization. Is it a lift to try to meet certain needs with different types, or is that just sort of you just do a phased kind of approach? And my second part of the question is, if you do need to start somewhere, where do you start? Is it by user base? Is it by like type of system? Something else? And you may have different opinions on that, or you might be deploying in a different way with your customers. Anybody want to take that first? Sean?
Yeah, I'll start. I think the first part is really organizational readiness. And there's a couple of components that really come into play with organizational readiness. The first piece is the supporting technology. What do you have enabled, and what can you use day one as part of the Passkey experience? We see a lot of organizations typically start at the web. That's usually the area that's least friction, simplest, easiest to start with, through their IDP of choice that they have. The second piece comes into play is then, how do I enable that beyond just web access? For example, the desktop. Ensuring that now I'm starting to complete that user journey from start to finish, so desktop to web. And the tertiary piece then comes into the ancillary services, such as mobile applications and things to use inside the organization, and how do I ensure that I provide the right kind of access control process there as well. So what we see typically is kind of in that multi-step process, and then starting with users within the organization who can also be champions. So the most difficult thing, I think, for any organization is to make a change, particularly when it comes to authentication. I can't think of just about every organization that I've worked with that's gone through some form of transformational change with authentication, from usernames and passwords to SSO to to multi-factor authentication, stronger authentication choices, onto their journey to become phishing resistant. It is, some of them are not successful the first, second, or third time they go through the process. And so there's lots of interesting and unique lessons learned. I think we'll talk a little bit further later as part of the panel session that really help drive what helps organizations be able to adopt, do so quickly and effectively for their enterprise.
Thank you. Does anyone have any else to share on that question?
No, fully agree with Sean. The change management part is important, and for the change management part, there are perhaps three drivers. So first, it's something to think in advance when the organization is planning the Passkey deployment, is really to take time to identify all the user constituencies, all the type of user, in which context they are working, which type of resource they access. because part of the change management is really to work in advance on the user experience. For the activation, for the authentication, to really anticipate in order to put it as seamless as possible. After is, and we will see in the survey that we have, that training, communication is important, and we will come back on it appears in the survey.
Great, thank you. I was hoping you could maybe share some anecdotes around maybe particular customers that you have. You know, at the FIDO Alliance, we work on a lot of case studies just so that we can give those learnings out to everyone that's trying to deploy passkeys. But consumer deployments are definitely a lot more external and available because, right, we're consumers, we know that is what it is. Where on the workforce side, some of those deployments are not necessarily in our purview. So you probably have customers that we're not even aware are using passkeys for their workforces. So I was hoping you could share, even if you don't name the company, anything you want to share around like particular projects that you're working on now or have recently worked on. Michael?
Thank you. I think, and this is sort of dovetails into the last question too, is with any deployment, with any project, find your use case, right? Find the use case that causes the most pain, the most friction. Regulations are sometimes our friends, although we hate them. So ones that are regulated, that require a certain kind of control. We have probably the largest automotive dealership on the planet as one of our customers.
So we are kind of talking about automotive.
So I was going to say it's not entirely false, but not where we were going to start off with. And they had a very unique use case around thousands of dealerships, all with kiosks that needed to have some sort of, the shared kiosks that had to have some sort of credential that was enabled with them. And so find your use case, find your greatest champion, as we were saying earlier, and then expand from there. You'll find so many examples of other authentication needs throughout the organization once you build that out. But we started in that case with, to get to 30,000 employees, it was really a question of finding that one use case, which was frontline worker in the sales force, in dealerships and showrooms, that we're always going to have sort of shared kiosk environments and a very dynamic, fast-moving environment. Worst thing in the world is you're going to spend so much time buying a car. Do you want to spend more time authenticating, right? You want it to be, it fits into their whole model of being very crisp and efficient. So find the use case, find the drivers, and then expand from there. And in that case, we've got some webinars on that topic and I think case studies. They've been very, very successful because we solved the most immediate pressing problem and helped them sell internally, like how to move them beyond. You're right. Passkeys conceptually are really a consumer tool. How did we help them sell internally that this can be an enterprise tool, that you can manage this, that you can like centralize your control and deployment of this in a way that's manageable with your IT team? And it just took a really good use case, a really strong pain point, and then working with the customer.
That's really interesting, the frontline worker idea. We actually have a whole enterprise track that we're going to kick off tomorrow, and there'll be some fundamentals and then leading into some case studies. But the idea that you have, for lack of a better term, branches, sometimes with different kinds of organizations. Like one of the case studies that we're going to be looking at is around like real estate. Where you are under one umbrella, but you actually have different folks kind of running their own internal business in there. And the idea that you could deploy one technology across all of that seems a little crazy. But in fact, this is what you're saying is actually not as big of a lift. And in fact, those people probably take to it more because they're almost like consumers within those orgs.
There will always be those edge cases where it doesn't work, and we'll probably talk about that later. Yeah. But don't let the edge case derail you, is the point, right?
What do you think, Sean?
Give another example, and it was, I think, very spot on to what we're seeing kind of pretty much across every organization that's going through this process today. I'll kind of give you the end statement up front. Manufacturing organization, about 50,000 employees, fully adopted in 160 days. Global organization. How'd they get there? There's a few lessons learned that they went through, problem statements, challenges. So it wasn't an easy path, but they learned from prior projects. This was actually their third Passkey initiative that they've had over the past 10 years. A couple of the lessons that they learned was, in part, messaging communication. We talk about change management. We also talk about user behavior. It's one of the most difficult things to change. People are used to what they know. And the second you ask them to do something that they don't know, there's fear and uncertainty that they have. This is changing what I do day to day. What impact is it going to have to me? How many help desk calls am I going to have? What does this mean to me from an end user point of view and perspective? And that perspective is critical. The biggest lesson learned, the top line one, was from a communication point of view, lead with why, not with what. With what, the very first question that users have mentally in their mind is, you're asking me to do something, why am I doing this? What's the impact to me? Inversely, if you lead with why, and you have their point of view, their perspective, how this is going to help and benefit them from an end user point of view, not necessarily the organization. There's benefits absolutely the organization gets, operational efficiency, et cetera, but how does it impact that user positively? And drive that as part of the central core piece of messaging, gets buy-in, gets adoption. And now the next question that's in that user's mind is, okay, I know the why, now what? Now how? And that change in messaging has been transformational for several organizations that we've directly worked with, or I've directly worked with. The second piece is being very purposeful and intentful in your adoption campaign. It's not send a link out and say, okay guys, go make it happen. It's very much the engagement piece is absolutely critical, and having those champions, those peers, in as part of the departments that they work in, helping motivate and drive that. Come join us. These are all the amazing benefits that you get, and that helps drive mindset and change the perception to say, I want to be part of this group. This group is being very successful. Me too. I want to join this. And that was one of the big primary takeaways we saw through that adoption itself.
I want to ask a follow-up question about that, which is, what is the timeline, or what do you advise in terms of a timeline for that lead up to the deployment, and what are the most successful channels that you see leverage there in order to get the word out, this is coming? And is it like a trickle effect? Is it how many communications are we talking about over a time period?
You definitely want to build up that messaging and communication process so that there's plenty of awareness for the organization, for the folks that will be part of that campaign. Before you go broadcast loud and large, though, to the entire enterprise, it's good to have a focus group so that folks can connect with, from a pure point of view, pure perspective, and say, here's a group that's done this extraordinarily well, and we're going to replicate this model across the entire enterprise. So who's that groundbreaking group that's going to be your champions into the organization is kind of the first key piece. The messaging campaign that they went through was actually a 4-month process, leading forward before the first user went through and actually started the adoption themselves. So 4-month process that they went through. Now, every organization, you're gonna have your own spin on this, your own change on this, because there's gonna be things that are unique and specific to you as an organization and how your users work and engage with your organization that you wanna fine-tune that methodology to. But that's the process of manufacturing organization, that's the process that they took.
And then how many help desk calls did they get?
So amazingly, through the 160 days, they only had 10 help desk calls. That was it. Across 50,000 users.
That is another sort of recurring theme that when I talk to folks such as yourselves that are working with orgs, and also those orgs that have done that pre-lead up, is 1 to 10 help desk calls, because that part of the lift is not as arduous as you might think if you do that pre-work. Sarah, do you have any, you want to share any customer anecdotes around your workforce deployments?
Yeah, for sure. In Thales, we identified and we are contacted by organizations who have 2 types of approach. The first one is, I have in mind an organization, it's an organization of around 10,000 people in food industries, offices spread across the world. And their driver was, cloud migration. They were migrating sensitive data to the cloud. and they identify that, okay, using password was really not possible at all anymore. So as part of this project, driven by the CIO, there was a project to activate multi-factor authentication to secure access to the cloud application. And in this project, so they did not at the beginning do the exercise or identify all the players. They started and say, okay, we will deploy with and equip them with a mobile phone. But quickly they understood that not all the employees were equipped with mobile phone, and they identified that they need to find another authentication way for them. And they decided to invest into FIDO authentication, hardware-based FIDO authentication. So they really adopt what we called a decentralized approach, decided, okay, let's go. We distribute FIDO keys to the different offices, and then the employees will self-register, activate their keys, and access, and be able to access to the web apps. And we are really able to manage that in few months. And one way to follow the deployment also, and to push and to have progress in complement of the communication and training, is really to have a follow-up by the top IT management with metrics on really following clearly. There was a clear objective to have multi-factor authentication activated for all users. So they were able to manage that quite quickly, and even if they were spread around the world. It was really a decentralized approach driven by a specific project, but we see also many organizations who are not comfortable with this type of decentralized approach and are really more looking at how to control the way employees are using FIDO passkeys. And they are really more looking at how to be sure that what will happen on the field with the keys, how people will register the keys, and especially when the organization become to be complex. With, okay, you have a large organization of 100,000 people, and you bought several ones, so you have multiple IDPs in your architecture, so how will you manage that? How will you ensure that all your 100,000 people are really activated, and it's the size and the complexity become bigger. So they are looking at ways to really automate, more drive, or perhaps more control all those steps, and activation, and also on the day-to-day life in the way to use the keys and ensure that they are passkeys well used all along the life cycle, I would say.
Thank you. If you see me on my phone, it's because I'm trying to sign into the app so I can see all your questions. I'm not. Yeah, let's not talk about the texted code you have to receive. We have to receive. Like we get it. We're gonna get into the data in a second. So I have one other question. Like we talk a lot. We're talking about change management. We're talking about a lot of things that are not the tech, and this is kind of a recurring thing where when I talk to you all, when I talk to orgs, it's like, is it fair that the tech lift is not as substantial as it might appear? Are we glossing over this? Are we making really big complex projects sound too simple? Or is it really, is the tech part of this not really like the biggest lift? Or is it something else, something in the middle?
I have an opinion, and I don't know.
Well, that's the whole point of being here.
Right. So I question whether it's pervasive or how popular it is. But I think that the technical lift for this for passkey adoption, for that pioneering user segment, is really not that great. I think what catches people is the technical lift for the edge cases and for everything else and other platforms, and that's where we tend to get caught up. Again, if you focus in phases, as we've been talking about, and with looking for those small wins, there will always be some technical implementation elements that are more difficult than others. But focus on where the biggest wins are first. If you're looking at that core group and the first big benchmark, the first big milestone for the organization, you'll probably find that technical lift is not as great as you thought it would be, and then you can use that information, you can use that business case for the other parts of the organization that might present a few more challenges, some more technical challenges.
Any other thoughts, Sarah?
So I think on the technical aspect, what organization like it's a standard. So they are looking for a standard, and it helps them a lot. What is sometimes blocking them in this lift is more, okay, have their IT environment ready to support this standard, and they have to manage some paths to move to it and be ready, and what we discussed before, take the use case, take the application that can meet this.
Sean, any other thoughts?
Thinking through the organizations we spoke with, one problem statement does arise and was well stated prior, analysis paralysis. It's easy to get caught up in all the different permutations, all the different scenarios that your organization has, when at the end of the day, what you need to focus on instead is where is the area that I have the biggest impact to the organization, the biggest benefit, right? The one application that's air-gapped and 2 people use is not going to be that big of an impact and shouldn't be a barrier to adoption or a blocker to adoption. And that's changed that mindset to be afraid that we're not doing this 100% all up front, to what are the areas that are going to be of the biggest benefit to the business, and how do we make progressional changes, incremental changes as a journey. And that's the critical statement there, as a journey.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question that isn't on our list of questions because it came into the Q&A, and I'm just going to ask it now, and then we'll get into the data, because this is like we'll get 20 of these questions. And the questions are obviously about attestation. Sorry, it just is. When we talk about synced passkeys, there is less information that the relying party receives, and to what extent, in terms of, we're talking just about synced passkeys, right? What are your thoughts on, again, you've already sort of stated that there are use cases for synced passkeys within workforces, right? So given that, like how much of, the nature of synced passkeys, which is, relying upon, a password manager, and not getting that, you're not getting, I'm going to call it signals rather than attestation, but you're not getting like that information from the authenticator necessarily. Where do you see this right now? Do you see this as a big blocker for even you leveraging synced passkeys in the workforce, like at all, or something else? I mean, it sounds like something else from what we've talked about so far, but I thought I should definitely ask the question directly because somebody will ask it later.
It's a
great question, by the way. It's a very important question.
It's very relevant. It's super relevant because it's a question that just about every organization we talk to asks that question. It's one that's top of mind for everybody. And the thing that you don't want to lose sight of is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. As with authentication, it's not about the authentication mechanism itself. It's about what you're using it for and what are you protecting behind it, is where you start to think about what are the right options, choice, and flexibility I want to enforce organizationally. My needs from a intern in marketing are going to be drastically different than my needs will be for a C-level executive because of the data that they have access to. And so the question turned differently is, as I go on my journey to become phishing resistant, and synced passkeys are part of the phishing resistant mix, what are areas and ways that I can enable the enterprise, enable the organization to take advantage of the options that I have available to me? And where do I draw the lines where I need, most critically, the highest level of assurance for access, and separate the access control policies I have appropriately taking into consideration the nature? The second piece that comes into play is really in lines of asset management. that's where sync passkeys come into play. So do I have an MDM in place? Do I have mechanisms or compensating controls to help provide a greater sense of security for me as an organization, using that in the areas where I deem it's appropriate or it's right? And so it's, and for every organization, there's not a kind of checklist, yes, no, answer this questionnaire process to that. It's really to the organization and what's going to best meet their needs and their requirements as part of their journey with passkeys.
You look like you have something to say.
Another opinion, yet another opinion. So I just think attestation is funny, and the reason not funny, haha, but it's interesting because when you look at how sort of like IDP was created and centralized identity and access management, really sort of a top-down view of like how we're going to manage authentication across our workforce. And then the way that FIDO was sort of created from a bottom-up view, where they're going to meet in the middle and create friction is attestation. It's like trying to create now this governance, this assurance that they've been deployed, that we've deployed the right things in the right way. So in my mind, it was a question that was never going to not get addressed. And I think it's number one in terms of our roadmap and our customers asking for, like, how are we going to deal with the fundamental attestation that we need as we now take this groundswell, and there is a groundswell of adoption of passkeys and FIDO, and now rationalizing it for an organization that's always had a sort of top-down approach. So I don't want to get too philosophical about it, but it's an interesting challenge for organizations to have to figure out, you're taking a sort of a different kind of technology that's not necessarily top-down, and figure out a way to make it work with your somewhat top-down desires to make sure that you have consistency, that you've got the same standards everywhere, that you've got a common deployment. So anyways, it always comes up. It's number one in terms of the requests that we have, but it has never gotten in the way of a solid deployment for that first level use case, where the greatest pain is and where the greatest friction can be resolved.
Sarah, any thoughts on that?
We're already quite aggressive on your side. I think it's the same. We have.
Make sure you got.
Sorry. Yeah. So Sean and Michael were quite exhaustive on this. Yes. We have two types of companies, and some are really cautious on this type of topics before adopting sync passkey. So for sure, it could be a blocker or whatever. They need a moment to look at this, study, understand the way they will manage this before going to sync paskeys. And I think for others, it's straightforward. They identify that they need to move away from password, and it's a good way to do it.
So I think you just said the kind of something I feel is very critical, which is, hey, like a lot of folks are just using passwords to get into their enterprise apps and systems, and guess what? Like a sync passkey is going to replace that and be phishing resistant. Like, so there is, that user base, it exists in the world. It's almost a luxurious problem to have, almost, where you must have if your primary concern is around signals and attestation, like you probably have a pretty robust authentication system in place already, where a lot of like workforces, mid-sized companies like that, they're just not in that kind of a position. And now I'm stating my opinions, which I'm allowed to do. But do you feel this is fair? They feel it's fair.
Yes.
Yeah, I think.
So at the FIDO Alliance, we have several working groups. We have technical working groups, and we have adoption working groups. And on the adoption side, the working groups work on specific verticals and use cases for passkeys. And our enterprise deployment working group focuses on shocker, enterprise deployment. And so recently, the EDWG, in fact, Thales, HID, and Axiad actually helped fund pretty extensive survey, B2B survey around their workforce implementations of passkeys. And we're just actually gonna dig into the data like a little bit. The full report is just not ready yet. Actually, there's a ton of data that we're sorting through. And it's going to be, there's a lot of great findings in there that we're going to unleash into the world very soon. But I thought before we started talking about that, what were your motivations for wanting to work with the FIDO Alliance to do such a survey?
So in the group, in the enterprise deployment group, there were two objectives. First is to collect good practices from organizations who have deployed passkeys, and be able, so the idea really with this survey to have a data to enrich the white papers, to enrich the documentation we have, and complement this, update this with recommendation, good practices, and so on. And another part of the objective was to make a follow-up and see what are the blocking points for organizations who have decided not to deploy passkeys.
And why did HID want to take part in this?
For us, there's a couple of pieces. One was validating what we hear from our customers, kind of in a broader sense, broader case. One of the things that we've heard was that organizations are becoming organizational ready, but that change management piece was a challenging component for them to go through adoption. And this helps kind of really highlight areas that how do we as an industry help organizations go and take that next step. And understanding the data there is absolutely critical. How can we help maybe even specific industries may have challenges? How can we identify those and help them through the right best practices, models and methodologies that they could use to help them take full advantage and become phishing resistant end-to-end, and use passkeys as the primary modality for authentication across the enterprise. So those are some of the primary drivers for us.
How about you, Michael?
I would just add that for us, for Axiad, so Axiad makes software. We don't make any hardware. We don't make any hardware authenticators. But we knew that the answer to help our customers answer this enterprise problem, it had to be a collaboration between the hardware authenticator providers and credential management solutions like ours that manage those credentials en masse. And it gave us the opportunity to work with some really good hardware providers, some partners that we have now like Thales, and get a sense together of what it looks like to solve those problems and to get that enterprise adoption. That's what's going to be required to really solve some of the big enterprise use cases.
Right, so I asked the panel what data they wanted to share, and this is the first session of the conference, so I'm hoping I press this button and it shows that. Okay, cool. First session, the whole thing. So this is a mix of what you all told me you found like from the top line of really, really interesting. So looking at this, who picked what and why?
So can I go first?
Yeah.
I got excited about the first view of the data because, again, we assist people in solving large-scale credential management problems. And we do it by addressing, if you look at the first 2 points, why they're not deploying, why they've adopted maybe but not deployed, complexity and cost. Well, I don't see that as complexity and cost. I see that from our product perspective as actually about usability and manageability. That's really what it is. When we say complexity, actually the usability is what we're complaining about. We don't see a solution through usability, so it's too complex. On the cost side, I understand what their concern is, but I tend to see it more as a manageability issue, because we are trying to get an entire workforce to switch from something they know to something they might be familiar with, but just doesn't kind of fit with their muscle memory or sort of their mental model of how they work. That cost is solved through manageability and usability. That's how we deal with complexity and cost. And I see that. I think if we can reframe the conversation and talk about ways that we've addressed challenges and complexity, the ways that we've removed some of that usability, like we have a version of what we do coming out shortly, and I'm super excited about it because the user experience from password to passkey is almost identical. There's no change in their workflow. There's no change in how they think about it, again, their muscle memory and their actions. So I think that if these are the biggest concerns, we're well on the way, I think, to addressing them. That's why I was excited about the data points.
We had a question also come into the app about cost. Do you think this is a perceived cost, or do you think that these folks have actually, looked at the, have done some like vendor research and things like that? And this again is just what your opinion is based on the
And again, because I was speaking to cost, I think it is largely perceived cost, but it's largely wrapped up in soft costs that are not as visible. Like what is the cost from an implementation point, and not just acquiring new tokens or new methodology? What's going to be the cost to educate our workforce? What's going to be the cost to deal with the outliers and the edge cases? And I think that unknown cost. So we spend a lot of time unpacking that for customers, like to figure out, where are you going to potentially have to invest in your infrastructure and your staff and the way that your processes work, not just have it this amorphous sort of like, oh, there's going to be costs. Detail what those are specifically.
Sean, did you pick any of these?
Let's talk about one is actually very relevant to adoption, and it's about users. And for users there, once they use passkeys, they don't go back. And the data bears that out. And that's a very, very compelling data point. As we think about how do we help motivate, going back to messaging earlier for adoption, how do we motivate individuals, motivate users to use new technology? That's one key critical area. Your peers state that once they've made the switch, they're never going back. And that's a powerful and compelling statement, and I think one that will help organizations as they plan their messaging and communication strategy to use and leverage to help them enable adoption from the ground up.
I'm going to ask you a follow-up question that also came in the app, so this is actually perfect that I'm able to answer audience questions because you're asking the questions that they're just teeing up, which is there in terms of the rollouts, are you seeing a mix of like backup authentication methods? Are they removing them? Because when you say never go back, it's like, well, are they going to then are they removing those backup authentication methods or legacy like MFA methods, or are they kind of keeping them as an option just to keep like the stuff moving?
Where we see most organizations sit is that there's a grace period that's there, right? With any new technology, anything that, from an organization deployment perspective, that they're providing to their workforce. You want to provide a grace period so that users become comfortable with the new norm. And so there's a period of time where that does still become available or accessible to them. But there is a point where those options go away. Because from an organizational point of view, not only are the users using it, but I'm able to also eliminate risk factors I have to the organization today through non-phishing resistant options or methods. And only in scenarios where I absolutely need fallback capabilities, that's when I start to look at how do I do that enablement in those kind of worst case, edge case scenarios. But by and large, kind of stay on that center line.
That's really interesting. I had that question too, so thank you. Person who asked that in the app, who shall remain anonymous for the moment. Sarah, how about you? Any key call-outs on this slide for what you found interesting from the data? And we have another one after this.
Yes, so to complete the discussion, your previous question and Sean answer, in the survey we see, and it's interesting, there was a comparison question around, okay, what was your previous authentication method used, and now what is the situation? And we see for the organization who have deployed a significant decline in the usage of alternative authentication methods. And there is a graph with a difference we see from the week to the other one. So there is a significant impact. It's not just they have activated and not used, it's on the usage. They see a really an impact on the decline of the other authentication methods, password, SMS, OTP, security questions, things like that. For me, on the other numbers, so first I was really happy by and positively surprised by the number of people who answered to the question. So first, it's interviewee are in UK and US, a large number because in total that was 400, but more than 80% of the interviewees told us that they are deploying or have deployed passkeys. So it means the number of people who have struggled or stopped is around 20% maximum.
We had more slides than I knew. I mean, I did all of these, obviously. But so Sarah, you kind of just like, so that's the very important thing that I actually was very surprised, and it was 87% of those that were familiar with passkeys are in a project and or have completed a project.
Yeah, means that organizations who have considered passkeys, majority are in the process of deploying or have succeeded.
Is anyone surprised by that? Or pleasantly so? Pleasantly surprised, right? And I'm just going to show a couple other things that we wanted to show you. So this was summarized on the previous slide, which was the impact to security for sign-in and authentication. I think that's not surprising. We know passkeys are phishing resistant. We know they're the device-bound passkeys are the gold standard for security. That was really good to see. 2/3 say that was a higher critical priority in the organization, and you could see so the high was the most there, and that was something that you all found really interesting. Again, the numbers were. Let's go back to that one because I'm breezing through them. So any comment on this? I feel like we know this, right? So we weren't super surprised. But in terms of the higher critical, and then again, the amount of folks that are saying, we're doing this, does that fit into what you're seeing with your customers? Were you surprised? Were you, okay, that seemed like what I was expecting?
I wasn't too surprised, actually, by the data and the way that it represents and how we see our customers talking about it. It's I am a little bit, I think when we talk about this audience and we talk about the people that have been sort of following the work of the FIDO Alliance for a long time, I think there's a sense of why have we not finished this journey? Why are we not there already? But this just reminds me that there are still a lot of organizations in the world that need the education and they need the outreach in order for this to go from, 68% higher critical priority to 70 or 80%. There's just a lot more education that needs to be done. And I think often it's those people that view themselves in like these sort of, again, edge case in industrial environments, manufacturing environments where, it's not going to work for me. So we just need to do a better job as vendors providing the examples, the use cases, like how it can work for you.
Any other thoughts on?
I think directionally spot on exactly what was just stated, very much so. There's two things I think about directionally, as well as where organizations are starting is areas that has a high impact to them from a risk and compliance point of view and perspective. And the study bears that out as well. And that is also a driver for a lot of the choices that organizations are making for what type of passkeys they're using to start with as part of their process or their workflow. And so I think those data points, as we see that continue to grow and we see the adoption numbers continue to grow, it's going to be very interesting to see what the end output is for organizations, what that end mix will be, and how much a driver for them, for example, like device-bound passkeys are for frontline workers versus knowledge workers and the other kind of mix within organizations there as well.
On my side, sorry, thank you.
It got dark. Let's go back to that
just
one.
one slide on the type of users that was very
yes,
interesting.
thank you.
I found just a comment on this one. And it's in line with what we have said, and it balances a number of 87%. So 87% have deployed or are in deployment, but we see that they have started with a specific group of users, which is fully logic in terms of approach. We see that the number of organizations who have deployed to all users in the organization is still quite low. We have 13% for the one who have deployed, but it's fully logic. And we see a large variety of users here. So in the answers, we see users accessing sensitive data, admin accounts, executive level, what we have discussed beyond, as well as customers. So some organizations are also working on mixing workforce and deploying passkeys workforce and customers.
Right, and I think that sort of kind of bears out something you were talking about earlier, Sean, which is, looking at the base and saying who has the access to the most sensitive information. Let's lock them down, and that can get you pretty far, right? And then for the folks that maybe don't have as sensitive access, like in terms of a synced passkey, then maybe it becomes more about user benefit or productivity and getting people off passwords and moving, so there could be a mix of objectives, right? You all agree? I mean, you're nodding. So we actually got through most of the questions in the app. I really appreciate all the questions. We are going to wrap does anyone in the audience have a quick question they want to ask the panel at the mic? Or have you all been doing a wonderful job? Yes, thank you. I mean, you're still doing a wonderful job, but.
Hi, this is Mahinder. I'm from eBay. One of the questions I have is account recovery in Passkey universe. What do you guys see what's working and what's not?
There's a couple things that come with account recovery, and it's based upon the organization. One of the things that I'm seeing trend-wise that's becoming very common is incorporating identity verification as part of the onboarding of that credential. How do you create a chain of trust between that individual and the credential, the asset that they use for corporate access? And so there's a couple of ways in which organizations are approaching that. Some is through self-service. Some is through more of a managed process that they go through. But that's one of the primary drivers that I see.
I also see it being very much some of the requests are for self-service. Like it needs to be it can't all create a ticket. It can't go to a help desk. There needs to be methods in place for it. And that's one of the things that we've worked on in our product itself, and also enhancements coming up is how to better do the self-service elements of it.
The same for us, having process in place for the recovery through IT team, yeah.
Do you see any trends in the deployment of passkeys here? Is it between a split between someone authenticating to something like an IDP or an SSO provider as an intermediary, or people directly authenticating to a relying party, specifically within enterprise?
In enterprise, mainly it's authenticate through an IDP, what we see for people working in the organization.
I could speak to kind of broadly from what I've seen with customers that I worked with, and starting point is IDP, endpoint is kind of the next step. So how do you go from the OS login off to enterprise services in kind of a frictionless, easy way? That's the next step that organizations take, but they usually start with the IDP because that has the biggest value to the organization to start with. It's the easiest one to turn on and enable for the enterprise. But then desktop is the next step.
So we're going to wrap there. Please help me to thank our awesome panel that's kicked off Authenticate 2024. This year, we introduced this speaker corner, which is over in the corner of the foyer. And the idea is that after each session, if the speaker's available, they'll go over there so that you can access them, ask them questions, get to know them. So if you want to meet folks over there, that's a great place for that. I really thought this to kick off the show and kick off some of the enterprise discussions that will take place over the course of the show. This was like a wonderful foundational kickoff into that. So I want to thank you so much. And I want to thank you all for attending the session. We have about 3 minutes, and then we'll kick off our next session, which is about building the business case and ROI for passkeys. So take a little time to transition, and we'll see you back here in a few minutes. Thank you.